if you can talk about Canada's response to missing and murdered women and the whole issue in the recent report that just came out versus the United States and what you want to see here.
The acronym MMIW is something that started in Canada quite a few years ago. A lot of people actually use the term MMIWG, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. There was a task force put in place many years ago where the RCMP started to investigate the high levels of missing and murdered women occurring across the country. We have a highway in British Columbia called the Highway of Tears, where apparently over 40 women have gone missing. However, grassroots activists will tell you that number is much higher. Right now, as we speak, there are around 1,000 people said to be missing. But again, grassroots people will say that that number is much higher. It can be as high as 4,000 to 5,000. That number is always skewed because there are people that might not identify as Native American or be known as Native American in the circles that they're in when they're not within their communities. And there's a lot of people that are not identified. And then, of course, there are people that are missing and never found. In the United States, as of 2016, there was 5,716 women in the missing persons database in the United States, and of course that number is said to be much higher as well. We have the highest rates of rape and sexual assault in the United States as well as in Canada. In the United States, the Department of Justice tells us that 56% of Native American women and Alaskan Native women will experience rape or sexual assault in their lifetime. Again, I have to revert back to what people say on our reservations and in our Indigenous communities, that that number has been said in some cases to be as high as 80 or 90%. The issue has nothing to do with the border. A border that has been placed upon Native nations is what I call border imperialism, and this issue is the same in Canada as it is in the United States, as it is in Mexico. Indigenous people are still considered, in my opinion, by certain segments of society, not quite as human as others, and are something that can be seen as an object, and they are targeted by, I would say, certain populations of this country with a white supremacist mentality.
And what does the Violence Against Women Act have to do with, or how does the Violence Against Women Act address this crisis of the Native American community and the greater American community?
VAWA is very important. It took 25 years to get where it is right now. In 2013, an amendment was made to it to ensure more rights and safeties for Indigenous women, for our Native American communities, for immigrant communities, and for LGBTQ communities, because we face higher rates of violence. The Violence Against Women Act is an absolute necessity for all women in this country. But like I said, it's important that we single out some populations that are targeted. And what's disturbing to me, what's upsetting to me, is right now it's still waiting to be reinstated like it is every year. It's still waiting on a budget, and it's still sitting on the table. And that's not okay. The Violence Against Women Act should always be in place. There should never be any nail biting or whether or not there's going to be funding for these programs again the next year. And Trump quietly, this past April, rolled back the definition of what domestic violence is. It took us a very long time to move away from the judicial definition of domestic violence towards the much more comprehensive view of what domestic violence means, talking about emotional abuse and verbal abuse and so much more. It was a very long, comprehensive list of what that is, and it took years to get there. And as of April, it was rolled back to just one sentence. And so the Violence Against Women Act provides funding for Indigenous communities so that they can continue to educate and work with people, with victims of all sorts of crimes, sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, and it's a much needed act that is used to help keep our people safe.